It was very unusual the way the dust would not cloud and would go out, radiate around, and then hit the ground.
Buzz Aldrin saw something on the moon. It wasn't an alien, it wasn't a structure, it was something in the vast, empty blackness that broke his spirit. When he breaks down, saying NASA lied, he's not talking about a hoax. He's talking about a magnificent desolation, so powerful it made him question reality. The thing nobody tells you is that the moon landing was not just a scientific victory. For the men who went, it was a terrifying spiritual ordeal. Aldrin's emotional burden. In multiple interviews, from CBS News to GQ and People magazine, Aldrin has revealed fragments of this emotional complexity. Sometimes he smiles, remembering the weightless hop across the powdery gray. Other times, his voice breaks when he recalls looking back at Earth, a small, shimmering marble suspended in an endless black ocean. "It's a beautiful sight," he once said softly, "but it reminds you of how far from home you are." This is what many call the overview effect. It's a profound psychological shift that happens when an astronaut sees Earth from space, not as a map of countries, but as a tiny, fragile-looking ball of life. To put it mildly, it can change your entire perspective. For Aldrin, this wasn't just a cool view, it was an existential shock. During the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 in 2019, the cameras caught something unexpected. As a reporter asked what moment stood out most, Aldrin paused. His eyes welled up. "The silence," he murmured. "It was absolute. No wind, no sound, no life. Just us." That silence, he explained, wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. You see, on Earth, sound is everywhere, carried on the air. On the moon, there is no air. There is no medium for sound. The only sounds he could hear were the ones inside his suit, the hiss of his oxygen, the crackle of the radio, and the pounding of his own heart. It was the absence of everything familiar, air, sound, motion, that made him realize in a single breath just how fragile human existence truly is. To most of the world, the moon landing was a triumph of science and courage, a banner moment in history. But for the men who stood there, it was also something deeply unsettling. Aldrin's tears weren't about fear or failure, they were about understanding. "We were farther from home than anyone had ever been," he later reflected, "and yet somehow I felt closer to everything." That paradox, the simultaneous isolation and connection, defined his experience. Imagine it. Standing in a place so empty, so still that even your own heartbeat feels intrusive. The horizon curves gently, the sky is pure darkness, and your own shadow stretches infinitely into nothing. Aldrin described that feeling as existential vertigo. "You're looking at a world that doesn't care whether you exist or not," he told GQ, "and in that indifference you find perspective." But the weight of that realization didn't leave him when he returned. In fact, it followed him more persistently than the lunar dust that clung to his suit. After Apollo 11, Aldrin struggled. He struggled with fame, with expectations, and with meaning. What many overlooked is that the man who went to the moon was a colonel, an engineer, a pilot. The man who came back was something else. He was a global icon, but he felt like a stranger. The moon had given him purpose, but it had also taken something intangible from him, the comfort of ignorance. "It's hard to come back to grocery stores and traffic lights after you've seen infinity," he admitted years later. This led to a dark period in his life, a battle with deep personal demons and a dependency on alcohol. He was the man who had done the impossible, yet he couldn't cope with normal life. This is the lie he talks about. The lie is that the heroes come home and live happily ever after. The truth is, the journey changed him in ways that NASA and the world were not prepared to handle. Those who met Aldrin in later years often spoke of two sides to him, the confident engineer and the contemplative philosopher. Beneath his technical precision was an almost poetic sorrow. When asked in a 2024 People magazine interview what the moon really meant to him, he smiled faintly. "It's not what people think," he said. "It's not just rock and dust. It's reflection. You look out there and all you really see is yourself." Perhaps that's why, when he tears up, it's not weakness but recognition. The moon stripped him of all illusions, of grandeur, of permanence, even of identity. It showed him humanity in its rawest form, small, curious, and temporary. Standing on that barren world, Aldrin confronted a truth no textbook could teach. that exploration is not about conquering the unknown, but about coming to terms with it. Even decades later, his emotions haven't dulled. Every anniversary, every documentary appearance seems to reopen the same wound, a tender scar left by awe. "You never really leave the moon," he once said quietly. "It's always with you, somewhere behind your eyes." And maybe that's the secret behind his trembling voice. Not that the moon hides some dark revelation, but that it reveals too much about us, our planet, our need to reach beyond what we can touch. Buzz Aldrin didn't cry because the moon was strange. He cried because for one fleeting moment it was perfectly, painfully familiar. But before the tears, there was the mission itself, landing with seconds to spare. In 1969, Buzz Aldrin wasn't yet a symbol of cosmic humility. He was a precision-minded pilot, an engineer, a man whose calm intellect had been honed in the vacuum of military and scientific discipline. But the moon would soon transform him from a technician into something else, a philosopher of space. The Apollo 11 mission was not built on emotion, it was built on mathematics, risk, and resilience. Thousands of people, decades of research, and billions of dollars culminated in that July 16th launch from Kennedy Space Center. Get this, the Saturn V rocket was a beast. Standing 363 feet tall, bigger than the Statue of Liberty, it was the most powerful machine ever built by humans. At liftoff, it unleashed 7.6 million pounds of thrust and burned 20 tons of fuel per second. The sound wasn't just heard, it was a physical force, a seismic event that shook buildings for miles. As this monster roared into the sky, Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins sat compressed inside a capsule smaller than a modern SUV, surrounded by switches, wires, and the hum of machinery carrying the weight of human hope. Aldrin had trained meticulously for this. A former Air Force pilot with a doctorate from MIT, he was the first astronaut to earn a PhD. His dissertation was on orbital rendezvous mechanics, a topic that became essential to docking spacecraft in lunar orbit. His nickname among NASA colleagues was Dr. Rendezvous, a testament to his meticulousness and cool under pressure. To him, the moon was not yet mystical. It was a target, a destination, a set of coordinates to be reached and conquered. After 3 days in the black void between worlds, Apollo 11 approached lunar orbit. The crew was silent as they crossed into the moon's shadow and watched Earth disappear behind gray curvature. For a few brief minutes, all human communication vanished. They were alone, truly alone for the first time in human history. Then came the descent, and this is where things nearly went terribly wrong. The lunar module, Eagle, separated from the command module and began its 12-minute fall to the surface. Almost immediately, alarms started blaring. 1,202, then 1,201. These were codes the astronauts had never even seen in simulations. The landing computer was overloaded. Armstrong piloted manually, looking for a safe spot while Aldrin read out altitude and fuel data in rapid bursts, his steady voice anchoring the chaos. But not all things are what they seem. That calm voice was masking a terrifying reality. Mission Control was telling them they had 60 seconds of fuel left. Then 30. Armstrong was still hunting as the computer was trying to land them in a boulder-filled crater. With less than 30 seconds of fuel remaining, Armstrong finally announced, "The Eagle has landed." Aldrin didn't cheer. Instead, he exhaled and said simply, "Beautiful view." That calm professionalism masked something deeper stirring inside him. Hours later, as he prepared to climb down the ladder, he did something no one was expecting. You see, NASA was in a legal battle. The Apollo 8 crew had read from the Book of Genesis, and it caused a lawsuit. So, Aldrin had been quiet about his plan. A devout Presbyterian elder, he brought with him a small communion kit prepared by his church. Alone in the lunar module, with Earth hanging in the distance, he poured a few drops of wine into a chalice and took communion. It was the first sacrament ever performed on another world, the first food and liquid consumed on the moon. He said later that he wanted to give thanks in a way that felt deeply personal, beyond the roar of Mission Control. It was a moment of gratitude, he said, for being part of something greater than myself. When Aldrin and Armstrong explored the lunar surface, they spent just over 2 hours outside, collecting samples, planting the American flag, and setting up scientific instruments. but every motion was deliberate. The reduced gravity made them move like slow dancers, their shadows long and sharp in the unfiltered sunlight. It was work, Aldrin said, but it was also art. We were painting history with each footprint. Back on Earth, the world saw heroes. Parades, headlines, and medals followed. But for Aldrin, something else lingered, not glory, but a kind of silence that no crowd could fill. The mission had succeeded, but it had also changed him in ways no one could measure. We went to the moon as technicians, he reflected years later. We came back as witnesses. The experience cracked something open inside him, the boundary between science and spirit. He had traveled farther than anyone, yet what stayed with him wasn't distance or danger, but the feeling of smallness. The moon, he would come to realize, was not a place to conquer. It was a place to understand. And so the man who once approached the cosmos with equations and precision returned with emotion. The same mind that had calculated orbits now wrestled with questions no formula could solve. So what did they find in that haunting, silent world? Why there were no stars? For centuries, humanity had looked up at the moon with affection, the glowing sentinel of night, the muse of poets, the symbol of romance and mystery. Yet when Aldrin set foot upon its surface, he found something utterly alien to those dreams. It wasn't silver, it wasn't soft, and it certainly wasn't welcoming. What he encountered was a world stripped bare, beautiful, yes, but in a way that chilled the soul. He would later coin the phrase, magnificent desolation. It was the perfect contradiction, the only way to describe a place where triumph meets emptiness. The lunar landscape, as Aldrin described it, was a canvas of endless gray dust and jagged shadows. He called it varying shades of gray. But the sky, that's what was truly shocking. It was a sky so black it swallowed the stars. This became a huge point for conspiracy theorists. Why were there no stars in the photos? The answer is a wow factor all on its own. It's not that the stars weren't there, it's that the sun was blazing in the sky, unfiltered by any atmosphere. The sunlight bouncing off the white-gray lunar dust was so blindingly bright that their cameras and their eyes couldn't capture the faint pinpricks of starlight. Their helmet visors were coated in gold to protect them, making the ground visible but the sky an impenetrable, starless black. It was like standing in the middle of eternity, he said. You look up expecting to see stars, but there's nothing. Just darkness and the shadows. On Earth, shadows are soft. Light bends and diffuses. On the moon, there is no air to scatter light. Shadows were not dark gray. They were pure pitch-black voids. If you stepped into a shadow, you were in total darkness, completely blind. It was a world of absolute contrasts, blinding light and total black. And the dust. The soil wasn't soil, it was regolith, a fine powdery substance almost like flour, but created by billions of years of meteorite impacts. This dust was as sharp as microscopic glass. When they got back in the module, it got everywhere. And it had a smell. For the first time, they smelled another world. Aldrin and Armstrong both said it smelled like spent gunpowder or burnt fireworks. This was the smell of ancient rock, deprived of oxygen for eons, suddenly reacting with the air in their cabin. On Earth, silence is rare. The hum of wind, the rustle of leaves, the buzz of life are constants we never question. On the moon, that comfort is gone. Aldrin and Armstrong were enveloped in an oppressive stillness, a void so complete that it pressed on the mind like weight. It was the first time he had truly felt what it meant to be alone in the universe. What surprised him most was not the barrenness, but the strange sense of reverence it inspired. The moon wasn't just lifeless, it was sacred in its emptiness. Every footprint they made, every motion they took, carried the gravity of being the first humans to disturb a world untouched since the dawn of time. You realize, Aldrin said, that you're not just walking on dust. You're walking on history, cosmic history. So what other human truths do you think the official reports leave out? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden stories.